think about, the mentorship or leadership that is being offered currently in the Indian legal market, whether it be law firms or we want to guide the younger generations coming in?
I think mentorship is something that has to come from within without sounding esoteric about it. I think it also requires some sort of
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Startup Stories India. In all our sessions, you meet a new startup founder or some personality who's made a significant difference to some of the startups who have even become unicorns in nature. However, today's episode is a little different. Today, we're in conversation with Ms. Anjana Poti, who is a partner at JSA. And while she has an expertise in debt restructuring, M&A, project financing, real estate, and general banking problems, she's also a trained Odissi and a Bharatanatyam dancer. And no, her talent doesn't end there. She's also an expert at crocheting and painting. So, welcome to our podcast, Ms. Anjana. We're so happy to have you here today.
thank you so much, Tanya. Hi.
Thank you for sparing the time. So, let's cut to the chase. Today, we'd like to know first, start by getting to know you more. Our audience would love to know that what is your journey been like? What got you into law? How was law school for you? And that journey up to the position where you are today.
Want me to give you an inspiring story or the truth about how I started?
I think a nice blend of two.
I'm going to go with the truth. I decided that I wanted to pursue a career in law in my ninth grade when I standard as it is called. When I had absolutely had it with math. And I went looking to see which profession it was that didn't need me to have high grades in math,
Yet.
but a passable knowledge of accounting and related areas. So I chose the law, and then I proceeded to figure out where I wanted to do my course from. I'm from Madras or Chennai, as you'd like to call it, but and there was an option there of the Government Law College in Chennai. But what were the options available post my course is something that I thought about, and that's when the National Law School was on the rise, and I'd heard a lot about it. So then that was one option, and then there was also the ability to sort of choose from the two or three other options available in India at the point.
Yeah.
As luck would have it, I made it to the list for National Law School, and the 5 years that I spent in college were, I think, nothing less than eye-opening in terms of what the possibilities in the field were, whether it's just academia, whether or policy, or if you wanted to go back into the traditional litigation and and to approach courts, or you wanted to do a corporate job, or you wanted to join a firm. I think the world was our oyster at that point, and people were only looking at that sort of sector opening up at that point. But about 20 years ago. Since then, it's been a very interesting journey for me. I started out at Reliance Energy, which is an infrastructure company at the point, now Adani Energy. And what I learned was that, and it's always been the case for me in my journey, I think as an individual, for me, learning is very important. And all of my decisions to move between jobs have been made on what's the next opportunity for me to grow as a professional, or grow my sort of perspective, I think, more than anything else. That's been the decision. So when I moved into ICICI Bank, and I spent about 9 years there, and 9 very, very fruitful years, I would think, was to say that, am I learning enough in my job? And have I achieved what I need to in the first year of having joined an organization as a lawyer? As what is my contribution? Is there a value proposition that that I represent? And those are the answers that I had to figure out for myself to move. And I think the decision there was good, because I think I found a nice space for myself within the team at ICICI. I was the group head handling structured finance, project finance, securitization, and international banking for close to 8.5 years of those 9 years. And it's a place that helped you grow. Let's be very honest. It was a true meritocracy, and it didn't they weren't shy to sort of allow people to find their feet, to drop you in at the deep end, and you know there was full faith. If you had faith in yourself, I think the organization allowed that. So that was a great learning experience. And I still say to a lot of my younger colleagues that that's not a foundation that you have in the business, where uh, the organization is poised to allow you to take the calls on the gray that you're happy to do, and gives you a platform. I think that's very important for your first few years of your career, because that then hones you as an individual and as a professional to be able to take on a number of sort of challenges that the world will throw at you. So after 9 years, and this is something that I've always been asked as a question, why did I move into private practice? I was in-house and doing fairly well for myself. Again, the answer lies in my need to move to something to sort of learn and grow my perspective. Um, so when the opportunity presented itself for me to move into private practice, I sort of took the plunge and joined CAM. I was there for 2 years, Cyril Abachan with the project finance and restructuring practice. And then in 2017, I moved to GSA, and I've been here for about 7 years now as a partner with the banking finance team. So that's been my journey. It's been, like I said, interesting to say the least. There were opportunities that were given to me to move into the business stream, right from ICICI Bank, so from the legal stream to move into business. The opportunities were there. And I think it's important to be able to recognize that opportunity. I think that's spotting an opportunity is also important in anyone's career. I think
For me, I loved when you said that your career growth has been guided by your wanting to learn something new, right? Like to identify a new opportunity, assess that okay, in your current role, are you growing enough, or maybe move on to some place where you know that all the skills that you built, there is something greater that you can build on that. So I think that's a very very noble perspective. And I would also like to maybe, whoever to one young listeners who are stepping in, I think that's a great perspective to have. First, I think go for the knowledge. See if you are growing enough in the place that you are, and then move on to another place like you feel then you could do more with that knowledge.
because once you have that sort of base and you have that confidence to be able to approach
Yeah.
your own with the right sort of with this right sort of attitude, I think
Yeah,
money will come.
exactly.
Right? And you can't replace experience with money, because at some point it's at in your career you're going to face a situation where you'd wish, I wish I'd learned how to do this before in my career. But no, that's not to say that this was a noble. I would think that the no, it's not so noble to move, but except that I think it's more selfish of me, that am I learning enough in this job? Do I want to come here every day, spend that 8 to 10 hours at my desk doing what I want to do? It was purely selfish to a large extent, but yes, the driver has always been learning. So, what do I learn when I move from 9 years of experience and moving into this? You learn a new skill set. You learn how to mold what you think is your approach to work, to a certain extent, tweak it to a certain extent for a different audience.
So on
Right?
that point, like what you just said, you had a very interesting trajectory in a way that you amongst the people, like the fewer people who moved from in-house to legal to a firm rather than the other way around. So I would love to know that the skills that you developed while working in-house, did they in a way translate fully well when you moved to a law firm, or what are the challenges that you faced after moving to a law firm which you felt that okay, this is not something that I was exposed to, this is maybe something additional that I have to work on?
So, a couple of things, right? One is, yes, to answer your first question, I think all of the skills that I learned in house do translate, right? Because you don't lose the ability um, to look at a business for what it is. You don't lose the ability to spot the risk, right? And that ability that you've honed over those years in house, they translate and add value to you as a lawyer in private practice. Like the more popular opinion is to say, okay, if you're an in-house lawyer and you move into private practice, you're more of a generalist and therefore you're not specializing in that area, and your advice is a lot more general and more business oriented and business specific as opposed to being on the law. Increasingly, if you look at the way that clients approach you and what they're looking for in your advice to them, I think is to be able to understand their context, to be able to understand what they are trying to achieve, and be a partner in that sort of growth, narrative. And that can't happen unless you're able to look at it from a business perspective. If you're really going to tell them this is the law, you can't do this or you can do this, that's not helping them in any way, right? Because the law is there for everybody. That's the beauty of
So,
of
in a
being.
way, I would say the fact that you'd worked in an in-house before and you had that knowledge of business, or actually sort of taught to look at things that way, that would
Yeah,
have definitely given you an edge rather than a lawyer who just knows the law.
absolutely. It gives you perspective. It teaches you that there are so many more connect dots that could be connected to what advice you're giving. That's not just, purely based on that opinion to say, yes, this is the law. That almost never is helpful to a client. Let me be honest with you. I don't think even when you're negotiating a contract, you're reviewing a contract. I don't think being able to say this is the right position or this is a standard position is now acceptable anymore, right? I think to be able to talk about it as something that matters to either client and to be able to make their minds meet, I think it's a skill that you as a lawyer need to be able to develop to be able to get the transaction to closure. I think that's very important for you to be able to balance it out. That balance you learn when you're faced with your business clients in the same organization saying, well, we want to do this business, tell us how to do it. Don't tell us that we can't do it, but tell us how we can grow this business. And well, this is the opportunity. Let's utilize it.
I wholeheartedly agree with what you've just said, because I feel often the impression is that we sort of discount the experience that a person has in an in house organization. And there is somehow this understanding that lawyers and law firms have a better understanding, or maybe they know it better than what in house lawyers do. And it's so important to have this discussion to sort of debunk that impression.
Instead of saying one knows more than the other, I think both perspectives are very important, right? You can't discount what an in-house lawyer brings to the table because they know the business inside in and out. On the other end, when they go to a lawyer, the lawyer is brings another skill set to the table, right? Whether it's transaction management, the ability to put down, an opinion in the way that is palatable to the rest of the world, or even just the time, right? So the amount of time that an in-house lawyer has to do all of these things, you have a team that's sitting in a law firm that can do just this. Whereas, for instance, I might be doing 2 or 3 transactions at a time, but the same in-house lawyer will have 15 other transactions on their plate. So it's a question of time. It's a question of perspective, and I don't think one knows more than the other. I think the skill sets are just a bit different. You're trained to be a generalist. You're trained to look at ticker value for the business while you're in house. Well, you have to train yourself to look at the attention to detail, or you have to train yourself to be exact about what you're stating, because you can't go back and say, "Well, I thought this was the case, but it's not." I'm sorry, because they come to you for that advice, right? So you have to be able to, be more precise. I think so. The skills that you have to develop if you're in a law firm are slightly different. And one more softer skill that you have to develop when you're within a law firm space is that you have to understand that we're all lawyers, we're all professionally trained, but we're not trained to in the business of the law, right? That's one skill set that you have to learn if you're moving from in-house to practice, is the ability to state what your value proposition is. And you have to state that almost on a daily basis to every client, to any new client that you have to approach, or even to your existing clients to say, how can we help you better because this is what we bring to the table. So the ability to market, the ability to be able to package your product, and in this case, it's you and your team that's the product, right? So that's something that you don't learn in house. That's one skill set that you need. So I think apart from just the knowledge, I think the most softer skills of attention to detail, the ability to package your business as a product, uh, to be able to add value to every transaction, right? And expand the pie. I think these are the things that you have to learn. I think as when you transition from one, and if you unless you make it conscious, and this is why mentorship is so important. Unless you make it conscious and have people to tell you that these are the things that you need to look at. It's really nice that you have the opportunity to move from in-house to private practice. But have you thought about this? Have you thought about the fact that now from being the customer, you are now the service provider, right? And it's very simplistic to sort of approach it that way, but that is the truth. It is a shift in your mindset, as in you're a consumer of the services as an in-house lawyer, whereas you are the service provider. You have to make sure that your client is happy at the end of the day, if you want to be successful. Also, these are the subtle shifts. I think if they pointed out to you and you make it a conscious decision as opposed to something that let me learn when the opportunity hits me, I think you're more successful at building that sort of rapport with your clients.
I think that's a wonderful piece of advice, because I'm sure there are a lot of people who are still contemplating that shift. And I think you've given a very clear picture as to what is it that should be expected of your part when you make that shift. And it's not just like from in-house to a law firm. I think sometimes like I'm someone who personally moved from a law firm background to in-house, right? So it took me some time to realize that, okay, sure, people are looking at it from a very business way of things. My approach was a little more academic in the past. So I've also had to bring that conscious change in the way I think and I like to work on matters now. But you're right that that balance has to be made. And I feel that you it doesn't matter which segment you're transferring from. If you work on those skills, I think you'd be a great fit in any organization.
I agree. I think that's important.
You mentioned a great point of mentorship, that we actually be able to tell young people that, see, this is what is expected, this is the kind of perspective shift that you need to bring. But what do you think about the mentorship or leadership that is being offered currently in the Indian legal market, whether it be in law firms, or do you think there has been a conscious shift in the way that, do you think people in leadership positions are really taking up the onus to say that, oh, we want to guide the younger generations coming in? Or do you still think that, we're still more self-motivated, self-driven, learning through our own trial and error method? And how do you see that balance coming in? How should one really approach that? Because I get a lot of questions from younger lawyers that, see, I would love to ask my partner, because but my partner is so busy. I'm not sure if they'd have time to mentor me. So what is your take on that?
So it's interesting. I don't think it's a question of a shift in in a group mindset. I think more often than not, it's very individual. I think mentorship is something that has to come from within without sounding esoteric about it. I think it also requires some sort of futuristic outlook, so to speak. Right? You have to see value in a particular in a person, be able to want to train that person to do what they could achieve, and in a better way or more efficient way. And I've always said this to all my juniors: everybody gets the same training. It's the same 5 years of training, right? What sets you apart is how you use that training, how you use your knowledge of the law, and what I'm here for. And as a mentor, and I've always looked at it that way. What I'm here for is to bridge your experience gap, right? To bridge your perspective gap, because I know the same law that you do. I don't know any better from the books than you do. But if I've seen something for 20 years, I can sort of see in hindsight I can see a pattern, and I can tell you that this is probably what is going to happen within this thing. It's not a superpower. Mentorship is not a superpower. It's just each person's individual choice. And like you mentioned, there are some individuals who believe that it's a sink or swim sort of situation. Just throw them in there and they need to survive. or there are some mentors who believe that sitting down with them and that document for the 2.5 hours that it takes to review the document with them is the right way to go about it. There is no right or wrong way. I think it's a combination of what works for you as an individual and talking with the mentor. And feedback is important, right? In every situation, you have to see whether what you're bringing to the table is being accepted. And it's also about communication. I think how you communicate what your expectations are from your team. And I've had the benefit of having exceptional mentors at my career. And throughout those 9 years that I've had, what did I say? I've had a great set of bosses. And what's important is the fact that you learn to be how you've been taught. And I'm a great believer in the trickle down effect. And I believe that the way I treat my team is also, telling of how I've been treated as a lawyer, as a colleague. I think that's important. So it's a mixture of things, I think, Tanya. But I don't see a trend. I see it more as an individual approach to each person's team. I've always had a very focused. If I build, see, and it's really, again, like I said, it's selfish, right? I don't want to keep doing the same things that I do every day. And if I don't train somebody to do it the way that I would like it done or how I believe the client requires it, I'm going to have to do it myself. So if unless I train and create that run, and I'm a huge fan of this line that talks about, how you can make yourself redundant. If you don't make yourself redundant in your position, you're not going to have space to grow. So I think unless you create that second rung that is able to take on that sort of pressure, take the calls based on those grays that you've been trained to do, I don't think it gives you space to grow. But I've seen different sorts of styles, and each of them work the way that they do. So in terms of my own team and the kind of people that I've worked for 20 years, so I've seen a number of people come and go. And what I would like to believe is that if there has been somebody that has worked with me, if I have made a positive impact on their way of life, on the way that they approach work, on how they view a particular situation with a client, a colleague, a junior, if I've been able to influence that positively, I think that's mentorship that's actually working.
I think you've summed it up wonderfully. So, like you laid down the different approaches to mentorship. I personally have experienced both styles. My first job was at a litigation chamber, right? And there you're thrown in the deep end. Let's see, this is your brief. You have to prepare. So, from filing to listing, coordinating with the LMAD, make sure that the file is brought up at the right time, and sometimes even doing, like a minor argument of seeking passovers. And for a fresher, even a passover is quite an intimidating job. So the first time I asked someone, "Oh, how do you do this?" It's like just go see, observe a few people, you'll get it. And that's what happened. That initially my impression was, see, I just got out of college. I'm a student. How do they expect me to do all of these things? How am I supposed to know if nobody's telling me these things? But then I realized this is also a very effective way of learning because you're just figuring it out in your own way. I would go to the court every day, say what other people are doing, see how they deal with the registry, right? Because as a lawyer, you will be running around and not be able to do things for a while. But there is a way that you are taught like how to deal with people. What is the most efficient way of getting your work done? But I've also been lucky enough to be in an organization where my partner was so hands-on, like in terms of this is the way we should be looking at the document. This is how I feel the drafting should be, or giving us inputs on how this should be structured. And I think that, of course, really made me feel like I've made great improvement to the way that I've done things. So you're right. I am myself seen those two approaches, and I feel that they both worked in their own ways.
Yeah, they work to build different skills. I think you learn to be confident and independent in one situation. You learn to do what is required in the right way and what is expected in the most. It's a time-tested sort of efficiency that comes in the second sort of mentorship. I think both of them work, And I think each mentor and their and what they believe, and honestly, and just as a a quick bit of friendly advice, I think it's very important to pick a mentor, right? You can pick an organization, um, you can pick the industry, but if you're in your learning phase of your career, if you want to have the right approach and an attitude towards work, I think picking the right sort of mentor is very, very important, right? Because what you have to keep in mind is that you're also dealing with a human being at the other end of that. You're the person seeking the mentorship. You have a human being at the other end, so you can look up to them as a partner or as a senior, but are you giving space for them as a human being, and what sort of feelings that they could bring to the table? So it's important to have that sort of rapport, to be able to be comfortable with your boss, and if you aren't already, then build that, because I think human experiences add so much more to a mentorship relationship than just this is what you have to write in a brief. That is half your job done as a mentor. But if you're not able to lead by example, and I've been very grateful for the sort of mentorship that I've had. They've always led by example, and I think that's really important as well. So if you're not able to lead by example, that's half your job not done. So interact with your mentor as a human being, humanize them, and it'll make even approaches. Some is your younger colleagues come back to you and say, how do I approach a partner who doesn't have time? They're not never going to have the time, right? They also have a need to have a social interaction. So humanize them to a certain extent, and I think your interaction with them will be so much more enriching than just if you were to learn how to draft a brief.
I agree. I mean, just having that simple conversation can lead to so much value addition that you can't even anticipate. And there have been times that my mentors have sometimes given me advice which may not just be which related to work. It could be a lot of other things while you're working. How to. There are times that in law firms, like that there can be a lot of pressure at times, right? There is, if there's someone telling you that, see, the way to deal with this pressure is this is how you do it, and there are a lot of people who are telling you how to do that. So I think it's important to have that conversation, build that rapport, put in that effort, and know that sometimes in order to get help you need to ask, but time it well. I think timing is everything.
Well,
But yes, again, going back to the point that you said, let's see, building that skill, helping your juniors build that skill is so important, because at some point you want to bring them out to that level of competency where they're going to be just take that ownership of their work, right? So as a partner, it's important to me to ask you that, see, when you are hiring someone, say a fresher, of course, they have come with some amount of academic knowledge, not a lot of experience. What are the core skills that you expect them to really work hard on and develop, say, with in their first year of working?
as a fresher, nobody expects that you know everything. Nobody expects that you know what the stamp duty on every single document that you've ever worked on is. Nobody expects that you know everything that has to do with the FEMA. I mean, that's not the expectation that I had. I think the first thing that I would look for is whether they approach the issue correctly. Right? What is your perspective that you're taking when you're reading a particular, let's say, a group discussion topic that's given to you? When you're asked a question, they immediately jump to your bookish knowledge, or if you don't have that, are you able to extrapolate based on some amount of common sense? I think for me, the ability to think on one's feet as opposed to knowing everything that there is to know about the Companies Act, I think that's more important. So approach is one thing. The second thing is the ability to see be able to sort of look at the future, not in terms of where am I going to be in 2 months, what are you looking to build, right? Are you trying to build a reputation as a good lawyer? Like I said, and if you learn, then the money will come on its own. So that Money is not available today in the market, and any number of jobs available. But where do you want to be in 5 years? I think that's the other thing. How much are you thinking about where you want to be, as opposed to I just need a job to get me my salary for the next month. So I think how far-sighted are you? That's easy to be able to tell from that person's interactions in an interview. Um, the other thing that I would think that a fresher needs, and not necessarily at the interview stage, but once you've landed that job, I think what you need to start practicing is being able to, at every given opportunity, to spot where you can add value, right? As a and I'm speaking only as a transaction lawyer, because unlike you, I have zero litigation experience. All of my experience has been in the banking and finance industry. It's been both in house and in private practice. I've seen that the best way to approach a problem is to see where in this entire scheme of things will my input add value to this entire situation. Yes, is it difficult to see when you're doing a due diligence that's taking you into the long hours of the night? But if you understand why you're doing what you're doing, I think the interest in understanding what you're doing and how you're adding value is the first step. The second step is to say, okay, how can I add that value? And the third step is to think about, now I have juniors, and how do I teach them how to add value? I think those are the three stages that are very important, no matter at what stage. No matter who you are, I think these are the three stages that you go through. So as a fresher, the ability to be able to understand why you're doing what you're doing, the approach, and I think clarity as to where you want to be and where you want to take your career. I think that's important. I'm not sure if that's
No, I think that's very sound advice, because, like you just said, it sort of goes back to what I learned in my initial years. I was once put on a case which is, I think, like a general corporate transaction. I didn't really know what to do, but I was just assigned to that case like on one Friday, and the meeting was supposed to happen in an hour. The advice that I got that day was to see, in a situation like this, at least the one way you can add value to this, go take notes, sort that out, see what the problem is, see if you can do some research, try and help your partner with what you think might be needed, and with time, try and anticipate those needs. Like, once you've done a few transactions, even in litigation, once you've done a few arbitrations, you know that there are a few things that you always need, right? There is a certain structure that you will always need. Do it without having someone ask you to do it every time. Like, once you've got that experience, try and anticipate it.
That's perfect advice, I think, for anybody who's thrown a problem that they haven't been able to deal with. There's always going to be a situation where you're going to be put in a situation where you don't know what to do. The first thing is, I think, to first absorb. I think a lot of people forget that listening and being able to, absorb is as important as giving your view. Sometimes views that are provided without that absorption are wonderfully.
Exactly.
I think that's supreme one. I think it's very good advice.
Now I want to discuss with you something that, I think is quite prevalent in these days, is that women in leadership roles. When we see there are a lot of women, and of course, like I would say now with the growing generation, it's an even split between the men and the women who are joining the industry. However, when you see that when they reach the top, there are fewer women than men in those positions. Do you feel that there are certain obstacles that stand in the way of women reaching that position? Or do you think that there are any issues that are there in that? What is your take on that? Or do you feel that no, that might not necessarily be the case?
See, empirically today, if you look at it, there are a number of firms that are led by women. You have, even JSA, for instance, the first two joint managing partners were women in the firm when Jyoti Sapran made the transition. Even today, if you look at it, there are a number of firms that have been started by women. What I would think is that the reason that a lot of women start their own firms is because their view or their approach to leadership is slightly different, and it's not a value judgment on what works better or what doesn't. But I think if you were to experience both those situations, I think a firm that has no women in the leadership versus a firm that has women in the leadership. It's slightly different approaches to things. I don't think necessarily one is better than the other, but the approach is going to be different. And that's inherent to the nature of women in general, right? The approach is different. The thought process is different. So if you believe everybody has the same thought process, that's putting yourself in a disadvantage at the get-go. So what I think a lot of girls and women do in the industry is think that the way that they think is the way that everybody else, or at least the rest of the population thinks, and that's not necessarily true, right? So sometimes becomes a question of us tailoring our thought process to accommodate this. I was told a few months ago that women are more wary about asking for what they deserve, um, right? Um, and I believe that's true as well. They're more wary, and whatever reason, and I don't want to get into the sociological reasons for it, or what the societal concerns are. But it is the truth. It is something that you need to train yourself to think. Or if you don't, I mean, and I also believe to a certain extent that if you don't believe you need to conform, that's fine as well. But it is true. It is true that it takes, there are a lot of other concerns that come along on the way. You have family to take care of, that's playing perhaps more on your mind from a traditional family setup. That's not to say if your partner wants to stay at home and take care of the kids, that's not acceptable. I mean, if that works out for you, that's great. But I think the important thing is to be able to recognize what drives you as a human being, and then make sure that your life revolves or fixes itself to that. And many a time, I think there is this thing that weighs on you about what if I have to have children. I think none of that is a constraint today, at least in a lot of the firms that are there in the country today. There are no real obstacles to anybody wanting to have a very fulfilling family life along with taking on leadership roles. And that's, I think, incorrect for any young professional to think that is a roadblock. I don't believe it is. But that said, yes, while there are firms that are led by women, JSA being one of them in the past, the thing to keep in mind is that yes, the number of women that are there in the leadership roles are few, and that's something that you can't avoid the numbers. And what the reason for that is that I believe that whilst changing slowly, the law firm culture, the ability to stay in office for as long as you need to stay, the family concerns that you have, all of those things, then that if you're comparing apples and apples. So the path ends up being slightly different for whatever reason. But I'm a strong believer in the fact that it is changing. It is something that that will see a slight shift, I think, in the few years to come. But my advice is, don't be afraid to ask for what you think you deserve. And if that's the one single thing that you do, if you believe your contribution is at a particular level, don't be the limit that don't limit yourself is my only advice that I give to any young professional today.
I think it's a very reassuring thing to hear from a partner at like a top law firm that, even you fully believe that things are changing and you shouldn't really let anything come in the way of your dreams if you want to be in a leadership position at that, because there are no obstacles that really that are being there. Like, I think institutionally also many firms are making that conscious effort to support women, help them rise to the top. So I think that's wonderful. Now, I think as we come to an end of our session today, the one thing that I would love to ask you is, because it's such a topic that's been discussed everywhere, and what is your take on the work-life balance, especially for people working at a law firm?
See, when I was a young professional in ICICI Bank, we had these sets of trainings that we go through. And one thing that sort of stayed with me, and one such session was the session that we call Passion at Work, right? And there, there was this article written, it was very well researched, that said that work-life balance is a myth. Right. If you believe that while you're at work, you can be contributing 50% while you contribute that 50% at the same time to a home life, that's that's a myth, because you're doing 100% at neither place, right? So if you think work-life balance is being able to do three things at the same time, that's great if you're able to manage it, but all the best for your mental health at that point, and your stress levels. So if you're at work, I think you should be able to concentrate at work and be able to deliver your 100% to be able to be fair to yourself. If you're putting in that work, then you need to see the result. And you're going to have to put in the effort to see that result. It's a similar thing at home. So if you have a cutoff time, and I'm not saying that's generally true in every practice or every law firm, but if you do have what you have as allocated time for the family, then that needs to be 100% as well. So don't do that with half your phone in your one hand while you're tending to your cooking. That's more stress for you. I think that is my first belief about work-life balance. If you're at work, you're at work 100%. If you're at home, you have to be home for 100%. And I have a very unpopular opinion. I can't work from home. I see a lot of people who are able to, but that's because for me, once I get home, working from home is causes me more stress than doing the same thing, working from office. So I think that sort of separation is quite healthy if you can approach it that way. But seeing that, today, and I've seen that as a shift that is unlike the mentorship angle, which was more individual. I think generationally, I think work-life balance, in terms of timing at least, has become something that's very important to the newer generation. We were thrown into a situation where we thought, okay, if you're working, if your boss asks X of you, then if it takes up to 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night, you should do it because that's what you are as a professional. And that was ingrained in us, and that's that particular generation. Today, I see that shift, right? I see somebody saying to me, well, I need this leave, Andra. This is not something that, I'm, up. It's not up for discussion that, I can't take that leave. I'm entitled to 2 weeks away to take it. Just take a step back and say, well, yes, you are entitled to that leave. So you take it. So it again depends on how you approach that, right? So each person, I think it's shifting with this generation. They're very clear about what and what activities they're happy to do within what time, and the approach is slightly different. And I'm not sure. I don't know if I don't want to call it a particular mentality, but I think there are advantages to the way that they approach work as well. Right? They have more interests. I see a lot of my younger colleagues pursuing their interests more strongly than I think at least anybody from my generation thought that they could do. We were all free to do so, but our own perceived impact on our career was a lot more, and therefore more limiting to our sense than what they perceive. And a lot of them haven't, at least over the past 3 or 4 years, people who've joined the workforce have not been in office for as long as we've had to. So they're like, well, office is a place for me to come and work. I don't have to make my friends there. It's a slight shift, I think, in thought process. I think it's important. Works, but in terms of a law firm, I think it's the nature of the business that makes those demands on your time, and there is no one great solution to that situation. It is the demands that the clients will make. But I think being more organized about how you approach each transaction will help. And I think that's where the approach of each individual to that is important. So, for instance, what we try within the team is to make sure that, and at least I think that's the case with JSA on the whole as well, is to make sure that your weekends are sort of sacrosanct, right? You're not approached unnecessarily during the weekend, um, because what could have been done on a Friday perhaps could have been done on a Saturday, perhaps could have been done on a Monday, unless it's an absolute emergency. And then that also becomes a question of rapport between you and your team to be able to say, I won't approach, I won't approach you unless it's absolutely urgent. So if I'm approaching you, it is therefore urgent. And you be decent about it, right? You apologize for having to, impinge on their personal time. It's their weekend. To apologize, to be able to then let them know that, their time is valued, right? No, nobody wants to be treated like their time is expendable. That's not right. I wouldn't want to be treated that way, and I wouldn't recommend treating any junior colleague in that way. That's one thing. The other thing that has to be sacrosanct is your leave. If you're on leave and you've taken official leave for those 2 weeks, then you're on leave. And again, unless the heavens are falling, there are other people who can do the same thing that you could do. And I think organizing around that is really important. The sense of, I think it's a very interesting thing that we can learn from the new generation, to say that your sense of entitlement that you have to my time has to be reasonable. Right? Yes, you are entitled to my time, but you're entitled to my time, let's say Monday to Fridays. I have an individual, and I'm an individual who needs time to do whatever I need to do during my weekend. I think respect, I think that's also the other thing. You have to respect that time, you have to respect them as human beings. And that itself will end up helping their sense of whether they have work-life balance. I think
that's a very balanced take on the issue. And I belong to the generation that when we started off, we worked Monday to Sunday. And if there was a filing the next day, you're in office for 15 to 16 hours a day. That was the culture. And like you said, that the newer generation feels that, oh, we don't come into the office making friends. Our whole life was the office we were in, because most of our life was spent there, right? So our colleagues were our friends. They were also, I mean, we were bickering at times. So that's just how life was. Do I expect that from my juniors now? No. But what I do have is that, like you said, your weekends are sacrosanct. When you go on a leave, they're sacrosanct. But what I do expect from you is a good time management, your prior planning. Like if you are going on a leave, you should let your teammates know what your deliverables are. In case you need their input or something, that should always be conveyed. Yeah, that transfer of information has to also be then your responsibility.
absolutely. I think that's a great point to make. To be able to manage your time and manage your work in a way that you're not inconveniencing others by your actions. I think that's very important. And I'm glad you brought that up. That organizational bent of mind is also something. So that actually relates back to what you're saying. What do you look for in a fresher? I think that's one more thing that I would think is important, to be ability to be able to be organized about the way that you approach work. Because nobody likes to have horses for courses. You want to be able to say, if you're working within this particular framework, then I should be able to give you whatever sort of work I have, as opposed to saying, okay, this person may not be able to handle this client, so let me not put this. I shouldn't have that additional stress on my mind. But I think that's a great point that you made about time management and being able to communicate what the status of your matters are before you go on leave. Yeah, I think that's.
Thank you so much, Anjana. I think we've had a very exciting session. We've had so much to talk about. Thank you for giving us that time, and thank you for giving us so much advice to our younger listeners. And I think some of it, I've often think that advice that is so vague or generic doesn't really help when you sort of given that, see, this is what should be done. This is what I think. And I think that's so helpful in order to shape up yourself as a professional. I think some of that advice, I could use it for myself right now.
I'm glad. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It has been a great pleasure interacting with you, Tanya, and being on this platform. This has to be taken as as just my meandering experience through my 20 years in the profession. And of course, I'm glad to have met you. Thank you so much.
And we are very grateful for your time here today. Thank you so much.
You.
Bye.
Bye-bye.